InfoTecarios Podcast, el mundo de la información en constante evolución.
Infotecarios, ya estamos por acá nuevamente, un gusto estar con todos ustedes. Hoy tenemos una edición completamente en inglés. Agradecerles a todos los que se unen. Vamos a tratar de colocar también la transcripción en la parte baja. Mi nombre es Saúl Martínez Equiwa y bueno, vamos a iniciar el día de hoy con esta conversación en inglés. So, hello Juan, nice to meet you too, and nice to see you too again. This is a great program today that we're going to show interesting things, I think. We have very, very interesting people here today. But hello, how are you doing?
Hi, Saul. How are you doing? I'm here, as usual, from Chihuahua, reporting here. And welcome to InfoTecarios Podcast International today.
Yeah.
We have two outstanding guests here, Lucy Ellis and David Baker. Let's start by introducing our guests. Who goes first? Let's go with Lucy. Hi, Lucy.
Hi, Lucy.
Hi, Juan. Hi, Saul. Lovely to see you all. It's a real pleasure to be invited onto this podcast by Juan, who was one of our important people for the project that we're going to be talking about today, but we'll come on to that shortly. But so I'm Lucy and I work very closely with David, and we have spent many years working in the library and information science field. We are editors of a couple of Elsevier titles about advances in information and digital information reviewing. We're very active in the field. We undertake a number of consultancies for major libraries, library associations. We're based in the UK, but our work is fully international. And my background personally is in phonetic science, would you believe? Interesting fact about me. Possibly some of us actually have PhDs and degrees that maybe aren't directly related to what we currently do, but it's all relevant, it's all scientific, and it all takes a scientific approach. And I worked with David as a lecturer in the UK, which is where we first met. And then we went on to undertake a lot of work under David's directorship with David Baker Consulting. So I think that's probably a good place for you to come in now, David.
Yeah, thanks, Lucy. Nice to be with you all today. Really looking forward to this session. Yeah, I'm David Baker. I direct David Baker Consulting. It's my consultancy firm. We have a website that you can go and look at. We do work internationally on our consultancy. We've got about 15 associates across a very wide range of expertise. My origin is as a musician. I trained as a musician and I still perform as a musician, classical musician. But then I was fascinated by library and information science, particularly information retrieval. So I worked in university libraries in the UK. I've always done a lot of international work, North America, Europe, the Far East, and Africa, particularly Sub-Saharan Africa. I rose to become a vice-chancellor. I'm not quite sure what the term is in your part of the world, but it's the chief executive of a university, which, as Lucy says, is where she and I met. And then I was involved heavily with an organization called JISC, which is the Joint Information Systems Committee. It may be known to you as an organization that not just supplies the digital infrastructure in the UK, but it also works increasingly internationally, especially when it comes to content creation, resource discovery, and so on. Since 2012, though, I've been focusing on consultancy, not just in library organizational work, but also in terms of higher education more generally, and particularly organizational development and what we call human resources development as well. So that's enough about me. I guess now, Juan, you want to go on, and I hope you want to go on and talk about our latest project.
Sure, and I think this is our show today is about, I think it's your magnum opus so far.
Indeed.
It is the Encyclopedia of Libraries, Librarianship, and Information Science.
Yeah.
So, how did you come up with the idea of such a project?
Shall I go first on that one, Lucy, and then you can join in? That's a really interesting question, and I knew you were going to ask it. So I've been thinking, and the answer is it's something that I've always very much wanted to do. And working with Elsevier over a number of years now, we've sort of, if you look at the advances in information, but particularly the digital information reviews, the idea of the digital information reviews was very much about providing a focus for latest work in a particular field. So if you look at our recent titles, one on benchmarking, one on future strategic directions, and one we particularly wanted to encapsulate the professions, library information professions' reaction to COVID, to the pandemic, because we were all in it together. So I suppose on one level, the encyclopedia has emerged from our work there, that the digital information reviews are a very small encyclopedia. And then we were approached through Glyn Jones, our publisher with Elsevier, with whom we've worked for many, many years now. We were approached saying, what did we think about an encyclopedia in the field? And of course, we said, we think it's a great idea. Elsevier, very strong in the sciences, but they were moving into the social sciences, if not the humanities. And so Glyn said, if you think it's a good idea, do you know anybody who might be interested in editing it? And I said, well, I do know somebody. I know somebody called David Baker and Lucy Ellis. And we then went through an iteration process with Elsevier, which was really very interesting as to the shape and nature of it. How does one identify what's going to be in it? And also, how does one identify who's going to be writing for it? And obviously, that's where people like yourself come in, Juan, as a respected, trusted, and much-loved colleague of ours over a period of time. And so you and another 5 series editors, section editors, were chosen as people that we'd worked with before. And what a team we chose to be. So that I think that's where it came from. What do you think, Lucy?
Yeah, I think that's a great description, actually, Dave. And I would just like to add that this is really a first, this encyclopedia. I mean, it's obviously a huge honor and a really big thing to do in your life to create and produce an encyclopedia. And as David mentioned, Elsevier isn't necessarily known for its work in the social sciences, for its publication around social science. And so this encyclopedia was actually the very first major reference work, or MRW, within its social science module. So that was really exciting to us to imagine that this encyclopedia was the very first deposit, really, within the social science department, if you like, of Elsevier on Science Direct. So it's got a presence on Science Direct, and that was exciting to us, and a first in the field. And no pressure, of course, for anyone, to be embarking on this. So that was a real honor, and so we wanted it to be really good, and we were all hugely committed to it. So that's all I wanted to add to what David said, really.
I must say that also Saul was an important part of the encyclopedia, as he submitted an entry on the online communities.
Indeed, yes. Thank you for that. Yeah.
And also as librarians, I think we have a sort of a fascination with encyclopedias, right? And
yeah.
we usually love them, and but to embark on such an endeavor is
yes.
Are you sure?
Indeed. I don't know whether it translates into Spanish, Juan, but there is a saying in English: "Fools rush in where angels fear to tread." I presume that translates into Spanish. But I think knowing all that we do now, having done it, and notwithstanding some of the challenges and the issues, if I were asked to do it again, I would still do it. Obviously, we learned a lot from doing it, and there are certain things. If there's a second edition, there are certain things I think. I don't know what you think, Lucy, but there are certain things I think we do differently.
And I think
inevitably one learns from one's experience, if not one's mistakes.
And I think if I may just come in here with asking the question, what is an encyclopedia? Because it's not necessarily a given that people really understand this term, and especially now in the digital age. I mean, and this, the encyclopedia has only just been published. It was published about 4 weeks ago. It's new. And it's not like we're all going to go and turn to a leather-bound 4-volume hard copy of this thing. Those days are gone. I mean, although they are produced, and I don't know how many of those printed copies are actually produced. I would love to know, actually, if those hard-bound copies would be sitting on someone's shelf. But of course, David and I always said that the unit of analysis for this encyclopedia is the entry. The entry is king. It's not so much the preamble, the prologue, the preface to the thing. No one's going to sit and read necessarily pages and pages of an introduction to an encyclopedia. They just want to go straight to it. And that's where Science Direct really wins, because through search terms, through their unique discovery structures, people will be able to get that entry that they need right at that moment. And that's really important for students who are writing essays, who are sitting exams, or, dare I say it, for the lecturers who are going into their next class, and they may be teaching something that they don't necessarily know a lot about, although they're librarians and information scientists. So you just have to bring something up quick, don't you? A quick foundational level piece of work, which is instantly accessible as long as you're subscribing, of course, to the encyclopedia.
I think, just to add to what you said, Lucy, my understanding from Elsevier is the likelihood that 95% of the sales of the access will be online. There'll be very, very few sold leather-bound copies. And that certainly fits with, if we look at our annual statements or biannual statements of copies sold, they are electronic copies. And again, I agree with Lucy that as you well know, you two, that once an entry had gone through the system, it was published on Science Direct. So there were lots of accesses coming into the system already before the encyclopedia was being published. I think increasingly, and I think it's been there with journals for a long, long time now, and because as a long-standing journal editor of peer-reviewed journals in the list field, the encyclopedia, or the journal title, it's a wrapper. It's a quality and a content wrapper for the stuff, the material that's inside. And I think that it's great that in the digital age, we can have that very flexible approach to the material, to the content. And obviously we can have, as we were saying before we went on air, we can have much more sophisticated access to usage patterns, whether it's what people are using, what they're not using, if not how they're using it, but also what's not there, what they're not finding, or who's being turned away because they don't have a subscription. And obviously that's important when it comes to the sales side of Elsevier. It's obviously they want to sell copies of whatever it is that people want to buy.
And what's interesting, just to pick up from what you said, David, you mentioned that authors were able to, people could purchase the individual entries before the encyclopedia was published, which is so far-sighted, actually, isn't it? I mean, you know, before the thing is officially published and released, authors who had finished their entries early could see them once they've been proofread and branded, were actually available on the module. So, Saul, I don't know if that applied to you with your entry. Do you remember?
Yeah, I think that it was online previously. I'm not sure really, but in any case, I think that it was very good. Thinking in the users, I don't know what do you think. What's the impact? I would like to ask. Yeah, what is the impact? And additionally to that, what it was your experience working with people all around the world? Because basically, the people that is working here in this encyclopedia, it's people from all around the world, and you need to think additionally into that. We are working with some topics that probably in some cases are very new. You need to try to publish ahead of, to try to work with the publish ahead of print and that kind of things.
Absolutely.
So what's your experience with that?
That's really interesting. I mean, we were determined to make sure that it was an international encyclopedia. And as you've rightly pointed out, we do have, I think it's something like representation from 38 different countries in terms of the authors, the writers, the contributors. And we were determined to do that because one of the things that we'd love to discuss as we progress through this podcast is the kind of the centricity of it, that we were determined as far as possible, and there's a limit to how far it was possible, not to have a Western first world centric encyclopedia. So if we were talking about certain things like developing countries, to get people like Stephen Akintunde from Nigeria, he's an expert in a number of fields, but one of them is Africa, because he's been heavily involved at national level in library developments in Nigeria. So it was wonderful. It was a very enriching experience, personally and professionally, to come into contact with people from all around the world. I mean, what I would say is that it disturbed our sleep patterns because we all took it in turns, as Juan knows very well, to have what we called the graveyard slot, because we met monthly. It was either monthly, at least monthly, and we all took it in turns to be getting up at 2 o'clock in the morning or whatever it was. Yeah. But there was a real sense of teamwork. I think the other thing, and you're right to point that out, that A, what should be in the encyclopedia, which is obviously a real challenge, and B, who was going to write it, given that in some areas you are kind of breaking new ground. But that then brings you back to what is an encyclopedia. But Lucy and I were very keen to ensure we had detailed instructions for all the contributors. And one element of that was you must, in your entry, whatever it is, say something about the future. So it's not past knowledge, it's a section on trends. We felt that was really, really important because knowledge is and information is changing at such a rapid pace. You know, you only have to go back to 1990, and would you believe in 1990 a book on the management of academic libraries in Britain was published, and it was talking about card catalogues. That's only 34 years ago. Lucy, do you want to come in on that?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, we were very lucky because we managed to engage the services of 6 section editors. So the section editors were responsible for bringing in the authors, to bring home the bacon, as we say in this country, to populate the encyclopedia. And of course, Juan was one of our 6 esteemed section editors. So we had Juan from Chihuahua, but with a background in Venezuela. So a real rich geographical picture there. We had Stephen Akintunde from Africa, as David's already from Nigeria, as David's already mentioned. We had Shamin Rennick from Trinidad, representing the Caribbean. We had Diane Brooksfort, who is based in Texas and is the Dean of Libraries at the university there. And we also had Gavin Davis, who is from South Africa. So we
had, you've missed one, Lucy, Caroline Williams.
Oh, yeah. Caroline Williams from Australia, from Queensland. Yeah. So we tried to bake in the diversity from that point of view. It was no good us just, hiring all our friends from the UK. We wouldn't. That would have been a big mistake. And that was the whole point of the internationalization. And then within those section editor efforts, they also looked internationally. Not only drawing in their own contacts, but elsewhere as well. And Juan, I think you had the record for the biggest number of entries in your section.
And I had to cut it down. I think the first version of my table of contents was like 120 entries. It ended up in less than 70.
Yeah. But also, oh, sorry, David.
No, you go on. You go first, Lucy. Don't worry.
Well, I'm just thinking that it was a big section, and mind you, you had a big topic. You had resources and communication, so you had a big meaty area to cover, which justified the number of entries. But also, I remember you were very proactive in getting the authors signed up, because when you start a project like this, the clock is ticking. We had 2 years, and it's amazing how much time it takes to liaise with all the authors. First of all, to identify the authors you want to write on a topic, you've got to go for the experts in the field, and you've got
also to having replacements at the ready.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And actually, it was in our contracts that section editors needed to identify the authors and have, as you say, Juan, a backup author or authors, and that was a necessity. And actually, interestingly enough, some of those entries we'll never forget them, will we? Because sometimes we were going for the seventh replacement, the 8th replacement, only because they were actually hard to fill, and because not all topics are going to have the same number of people working in that field. So information literacy was a really big one that we had to cover extensively in the encyclopedia, but approached from different angles, approached within different contexts. But then some of them are less extensively covered, but still very important to cover. So what was that? What was it? Advocacy, Juan, was the very last one of yours to be filled.
That was a pain. It was one of the worst. I think I invited that 12 people.
Yeah.
No one wanted to write it.
No.
Fortunately, it was David who persuaded someone to write it.
Yeah, I did.
Oh, yes. And also, Juan, I know that some of the sections contained a special section. There was a special section for special libraries around the world. Yeah. There are some very special libraries in the world which need to have an entry in their own right. And so those had to be written. And there are all sorts of legal and regulatory and organizational reasons why some of those are quite difficult to get published. But I think, that it was successful in the end.
Mm.
And sadly, I couldn't cover all the libraries I wanted to have.
Yeah.
But as you said, there were many different reasons why it was difficult to find someone to write about it, because even if someone wanted to write it, they were forbidden by their institution to publish an entry about their library. That was I think that's very sad.
I think that's very sad indeed. And I know there were one or two, Juan, where I ended up writing them for you, because the people in the library themselves, as you say, they might have wanted to, but there was an official policy, wasn't there? So
You were
a great pity.
You were the editor-in-chief and also the top contributor to the encyclopedia.
I'm not one of them. One of them.
Just let me go back a little bit and connect some interesting points that you made, because even if I said that we love encyclopedias as librarians, well, we must acknowledge that they are not as popular or are present in the within the public nowadays, and this goes back several decades already. But I think that with this project of Elsevier, with its major reference works, what it's called, with this push and the changes in the publication model, I think Elsevier has a good opportunity to bring forward again the importance of encyclopedias, don't you think?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, one of the things that attracted us was that it's not just a standalone encyclopedia. It's not a standalone publication. It's within the MRW envelope, to use that word again, within that wrapper. So as a student, as a researcher, as a lecturer, you can look at all the material. And indeed, I mean, I very much believe in this concept of you make up your own content. So you might, as I say, as a lecturer, you might, if you have access to this material, you might be pulling entries from the Encyclopedia of Libraries, Librarianship and Information Science. You might be looking at other encyclopedias or other publications or Science Direct, and you are bringing that together for a particular purpose. So I think in some ways the fact that we call it an encyclopedia of is unhelpful, because it potentially sets boundaries, if not barriers. I think the fact that it's really labeled as a major reference work within the major reference work envelope is more helpful. So we do need, notwithstanding what Lucy was saying, about, well, because of what Lucy was saying about, it's not leather-bound volumes on shelves. It's a corpus of material. And the encyclopedia label gives it the quality kite mark. It's not material that anybody can put up. It's not stuff. If we think of what had to be done to get those entries published, it can be regarded as trusted content alongside other trusted content. So I agree with you. I think there is I wouldn't say a resurgence in terms of encyclopedias, but there's a kind of, it's a need for a new definition of what the word reference work actually means in practice. And in that sense, I think the Elsevier approach, the trajectory, is a good one.
So it was also attractive for authors that Elsevier has offered that entries will be indexed in Scopus.
Yes.
So that's a plus, because as reference work, we should have a couple of citations. Eventually.
Exactly. Well, I mean, and as I think we've all found, a number of them, they aren't just encyclopedia entries. They are far more than that, in that obviously they're based on original research in terms of the literature reviews they're bringing together. And particularly, as I said earlier, those individuals, and obviously they've become experts, their views on what the future holds, but in the context of analysis of what's been happening before in particular areas.
Let me show the cover while you continue talking. The cover there.
Do you want to talk about some aspects of it from your point of view, your experience of it?
Oh, is that from me, David?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I mean, I was interested in, well, I mean, we've talked about this many times, David, and with all our section editors, but you talk about Elsevier bringing things together, and the encyclopedia is a bit of a misnomer, really. It's a bit misleading, because it looks like it's the final word and it's the one-stop shop, whereas actually it's part of a whole ecosystem in Elsevier's toolkit, online toolkit within Science Direct. And they usually go about that collation of information through something called a topic page. So if you have a subscription to Science Direct, you have a topic page, and the encyclopedia makes up a part of that topic page, because you might bring in journals, books, previous encyclopedias. So that's where you can go for the whole mix approach to inform your thinking. So it's a kind of, in a way, it's almost like revamping and rethinking the authoritarianism around the encyclopedia. Although, of course, we like the term encyclopedia, and it goes back to what you said, Juan, about librarians liking an encyclopedia, but it has that authoritarian feeling about it, which is not really quite the way that the modern world thinks about information.
I think that's really interesting, Lucy, because I mean, I have previous experience of writing for encyclopedias or one particular encyclopedia. And I said very much at the beginning that I'm also a musician and a musicologist. And many years ago, I was involved in the Dictionary of Music and Musicians, which is a very prestigious international publication. And that was very much top down, to call it that. There was a kind of a bit like the section editors, our section editors, but it was very tightly controlled in terms of what was in and how many words could be used for a particular composer. So obviously Beethoven got a lot of words. A minor composer like a composer that I'm researching got 500 words, and that was kind of very rigid, possibly appropriately so. But the point is that over time, if you look back to the earlier editions of that work, some of the composers who were really important aren't important anymore, and vice versa. I'd like to think that we had a rather more bottom-up approach, where we the section editors were part of a process, which
absolutely, and also don't forget that we purposely kind of wanted to encourage early career writers as well.
Indeed, yes.
Early career authors, so people who aren't necessarily 40 years down the line of their librarianship careers, but the up and coming people. And of course, those people are much more likely to be interested in the democratization of information as well.
I agree.
Not just, what everyone's been saying and those structures of authority that have held fast for so many decades, but to try and revisit and question, a lot more of a questioning stance about who holds the information, who has access to information. I know in Stephen's section, there was quite a lot of political and sociological material about the politics and the anthropology around information, section 6, and much food for thought there. And of course, that theme did run across the entire encyclopedia, because we cannot approach this encyclopedia with anything other than cultural humility. We have to adopt that approach, because to have not done that, taken that stance, would have been career suicide in a sense, because everybody is subscribed to this new way of looking at things, or maybe not such a new way of looking at things, where we have to acknowledge the power structures that have been in place for such a long time. And I'm not saying that every article was radical in the sense of needing to overturn established power structures and structures of information, but at the same time, having due thought for that. So just things that I think will appeal to perhaps undergraduates who are currently studying information science. These are the questions they have on their minds quite naturally. This is the the way now that people are looking at information. It's not a given. A lot of these established norms are being overturned and questioned, and some of the section editors specifically wrote about that. I know Caroline Williams in section 1, where there's been a lot of work about Indigenous approaches to information and the lack of acknowledgement of Indigenous sources of information. She took some care to bring that out, and also Shamin as well. But this is really for readers to discover for themselves. But the entries themselves do the talking. The content of the entries do the talking in terms of what they're offering, and I think people will like what's in the encyclopedia because it's the information that people need. That was the original concept of the encyclopedia.
I'm glad you mentioned that, though, Lucy, in terms of, for example, Caroline Williams' experience with First Nations in Australia and New Zealand. And it was very good to have somebody like her writing for the encyclopedia, because she had first-hand knowledge of a particular country, a particular library field or fields, where this is very much a live issue at the moment. So, and I suspect it's going to be a live issue in other countries. I mean, I've been doing some work, for example, in North America. Well, not in North America, but for North America, in terms of First Nations, the Chickasaw tribe, and looking at the original documentation before the American War of Independence. And there's this very strong movement developing there. So one would like to think that some of the people there, including the Chickasaw archivists and librarians, will be able to look at the work that Caroline's been doing and what she wrote about in the encyclopedia. So I think one of the great things about librarianship, to use that word to cover everything that it is it's in itself an interdisciplinary study. There are so many aspects. There's what you might call the hard science end, and there's the social science end, and there's the humanities side of it. So you're already looking at a broad and vast range of content before you interact then with the other, for example, the other encyclopedias in the Elsevier MRW wrapper.
Will you like if we show the encyclopedia's website while you provide some comments?
Yeah, sure.
Will you walk us through it?
Yeah, we're happy to
show
do
it.
that. Yeah, we're happy to do that. Brings back many happy memories. Well, obviously, we spent quite a lot of time, would you believe, because we thought it was important, on the logo. So you will see the open book. And I mean, should there have been a book? I think we felt that the book was a useful shorthand. It was a surrogate. It was something that people might not use anymore, or not very much, given the information age of the digital world. But we felt it summed up in the way that it's positioned there about what the encyclopedia was. Now, obviously, there are 6 sections, each with a section editor across 4 volumes. I know that's kind of meant that some of the sections are in more than one volume. On the other hand, one volume has more than one section, if you see what I mean. We were rather hidebound. We were asked to do that by the publisher, who obviously thinks of pages. We've got about 3,000 pages. We've got just under 300 entries. Some of them are very broad entries. So I wrote one on national libraries. I wrote one on types of library. And obviously you have to cover a lot in a relatively small number of words. Entries typically are between 4,000 and 10,000 words. Some are perhaps longer than that. And obviously, if you look at the very first one there, you've got Liz Jolly, who's Chief Librarian of the British Library, with her introduction. And then you have a whole series of entries. So libraries, foundations, that includes, for example, types of library, which I wrote about. And you'll see you've got this kind of standard. You'll notice there you can purchase individually, you can view the chapter, you can look at the abstract. And we did spend, as you well know, Lucy and Juan particularly, a lot of time on what the entries should be, how they should be organized. And as I say, we do have this template in terms of while we wanted to facilitate and encourage individuality amongst the authors, we also wanted there to be a consistency and a degree of standardization. So there's a kind of template or a checklist, whatever you want to call it, that means that whatever entry you're looking at, whether it's the first or the last or halfway through, you get the same sort of structure and the same sort of content. As I said earlier, every entry should have something on the future.
It's really nice to see the titles as you're scrolling through there, Juan. It's lovely to see the topics, and hopefully people watching this podcast will be intrigued and want to dive in. It does bring back good memories. But as you said, David, there is a consistency, because Elsevier told us that the number one item of feedback that came back from users, because Elsevier do a lot of user research, as you might imagine, so that what they produce is closely aligned to what's wanted. The users said that they wanted a key points box at the start of each entry. Do you remember that? So every single entry, even though these are quite condensed, I mean, I think you would expect, wouldn't you, that an encyclopedia entry on gaming in libraries.
I should open one entry, right? As an example. Let me look for one.
Yeah.
How about how about one by one of you two? Your two entries, you two.
Yeah, let's have a look at those.
Just a moment.
Yeah, sure.
But I mean, it makes sense, doesn't it? You know, that people want that box at the top now. You know, what are the key points? So each entry had 3 or 4 bullet points at the front, at the start, to say what is in the entry. So we delivered on that. All of the entries have got that. Sometimes a glossary as well. So sometimes each entry, most entries actually had a glossary. So they were very standardized, which I think gives the thing a professional, a major professional finish that people want to see these days.
And obviously references, further reading, bibliography, and obviously hyperlinked. I think one of the things that we felt was important was, as far as possible, given that this is an encyclopedia and there's a limit to how much you can put in an entry, there was a review of the literature. So there is more you can do. It points to further literature. But on the other hand, it's meant to summate, to summarize what is being said. Wow, this looks a good one.
Yeah, it looks familiar, you know.
I wonder who is this guy, I wonder. Yeah.
I don't know, really. No, guys, I think that it was an amazing job. Definitely. I see that you have been working a lot of time with this, but what do you think in the future? What's the next? You're gonna try to expand this one? What do you think about it? What's the plan?
That's a very good question, and I've thought about that already, because I think Lucy and I have immediately got more ideas. I mean, there are a number of things that are bubbling around, and in fact, Lucy and I have what we call our periodic summit meetings. So we've got a meeting coming up in December to determine what our plan is for next publications. And I think, as I already mentioned to you two before we went online, we're looking for more titles for our Advances in Information series and our digital information review. So if anybody's listening in and you're interested in writing a book or a book chapter with us, let us know. And don't be worried about the language. That's not a problem. We've been able to work in a number of languages. As Juan knows, a number were written in Spanish, and then We had them translated. We've got access to good quality people who can translate academic material. So that's the problem. But I suppose to try and begin to answer your question, one thing Lucy and I are beginning to look at is to go back to the encyclopedia. And now, I notwithstanding what I said, to look at clusters of articles, especially in the light of usage, to see if that points to either a smaller scale, a kind of off-print, as it were, from the encyclopedia, or a follow-up publication or publications which say, this is what the encyclopedia says, but time is marching on. So, this is another wrapper, a smaller wrapper, a book, electronic book, but it's a book which takes some of the concepts, the issues, the content from the encyclopedia and builds on it. So, for example, we wrote a book about COVID and libraries' reactions to COVID. You've then got some material in the, thank you. You're my best marketing. You're my but then obviously that COVID, to call it that as a shorthand, came up in a number of articles, whether it's COVID, whether it's disaster planning, a whole series of things, and the sociological and the political elements of it all. So one could then see a follow-on publication, which would be a standalone publication, but it would link into the encyclopedia. But it would also point to the next edition of the encyclopedia. And given the nature of the and the arrangement of the encyclopedia, I don't see any reason why we have to wait 3, 5, 8, 10 years before another publication, because you could just add more entries on Science Direct, which are kite marked as being entries from the Encyclopedia of Libraries, Librarianship, Information Science. The only publication date will be if and when there was to be an overhaul of the whole thing, and or an actual physical publication, which will be a very small number of copies. What do you think, Lucy?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, obviously, as you mentioned, Saul, the next step is going to be the second edition, and we have to then look at whether the issues are the same in the field. Are the issues that we wrote about in the first edition still around? Do they still have currency? Yes or no? That's one thing. And as David said, really, we like to think that we're talent spotting as well, because this encyclopedia has got some absolute superstars in it. People who have actually got a gem of a really good idea in there, even though they're summating their area. There's going to be a lot of talent in there that needs to come out, which the authors may not have seen for themselves. But we can go in, and section editors will help us with this as well, and identify those people who could potentially go forward and shape the field in a way that they might not be able to do unless someone was able to see it with that broad overview. We could even operate as a kind of librarianship, authorship dating agency as well, getting people together,
Marriage bureau.
Why not a kind of we could be a dating agency and bring people together who don't realize that they've got synergies with people other side of the world, but there's so much potential, because this is a huge piece of work and there's so much in it, and I don't think we really even, to be honest with you, appreciate exactly how much is in there, to be honest.
Just to follow up on that, Lucy, and to give you an example of somebody who's kind of, dare I say, grown up as a result of working on the encyclopedia. In the UK, we have the Chartered Institute of Library and Information Professionals, the professional organisation, and there are different levels. There's a membership, there's a chartership, and there's a fellowship. And this person became my mentee. I was her mentor, professional mentor, for her fellowship of the professional association. And as part of that, we worked on a number of things, a book chapter and so on and so forth. But also, she's called Lucy Roper. She's a special librarian. a solo librarian. She's the only person in the library. We call it solo librarianship. And she wrote the entry. She wrote a number of entries, but one of them was on solo librarianship. And she's become the expert. And in becoming the expert, she's also produced a fantastic book. This the definitive handbook on solo librarianship. So that to my mind is another spin-off. It's another benefit of the rollout of the encyclopedia, which is back to my earlier point about, I don't want us, and I mean us four and others out there, to wait and think, oh, encyclopedias are only published every 10 years. We could be updating it every 6 months. We could be, but not just with more entries or revised entries, but also what you might call spin-off publications, which takes let's take one section, that look at one section and say, within these entries of his section, where are things moving most quickly, and where do we need to fill the gap because of the speed of change? Produce something that is a kind of mini version, more like a group of essays as a digital information review publication, which fills the gap until the next edition proper, to call it that, of the encyclopedia comes out.
Yeah, guys, thank you for the invitation to work with the encyclopedia. I think that you have a good opportunity here, a big one, I think, because the world is changing every day.
Absolutely.
So we have today artificial intelligence and many topics around this, and I think that the librarians need more knowledge about these new topics. So I think that you have a very big opportunity around this, and I think that it's great. It's good to hear that not only it's part of the encyclopedia, and the authors have the opportunity to write another work and be creating monographical materials. It's amazing, definitely. Absolutely. And I think it's very good. Here, what are you doing? And the plans that are coming, definitely, it's very good.
Yeah,
thank you.
I'm glad you brought in artificial intelligence, because there are a number of entries in there, and obviously we were very keen to ensure that there were entries in there, and we had a kind of spread of contributions because of different dimensions to it, and one of the things, going back to a kind of administrative managerial issue, was where did some things fit. And you have some sections that have, or rather some topics that are in more than one section, as it were. And there's a kind of trade-off. And the sections, in one sense, are very artificial. They're a construct to manage the process of getting people to contribute and editing it and publishing it. And again, what you've got with modern publication is that you don't have the constraints of the first volume being on the shelf there and the last volume being there, and you've got to kind of put them together. It's a lot easier. But I think there are areas of which AI is one that fit into what I was saying, to identify the areas where there's most need for constant updating and to work on a way forward in terms of what you might call supplements to the encyclopedia.
And I think, David, we'll all agree here on just how huge this field is.
Yeah.
Especially when you take into account all the different contexts in which people are working in. And when information science is a huge field, and there is a lot in the encyclopedia. And I remember when David and I first began working as editors-in-chief on this. In fact, before we'd even appointed our section editors, we had a conversation with people, a couple of editors-in-chief who were working on the Encyclopedia of Archaeology for Elsevier. And it's really wonderful, actually, to have a look at other encyclopedias. We looked in depth at the Encyclopedia of Inland Waters. We looked at the Encyclopedia of Virology. Do you remember all those? We looked into all of these, and it was really great because it really makes you realize what contrasts there are between disciplines. And I remember one of the editors-in-chief of the archaeology encyclopedia said, well, it is a bigger field than you realize, you know, and archaeology isn't just mummies and pyramids. And I've never forgotten that, because the public, or, you know, even the undergraduate perception of the area they're working in is really quite limited, isn't it? Until you get into it and you see just how broad it is, and what the definitions are of your field.
Yeah, I agree with all that. I mean, it's been a great learning experience. And I mean, I think discussing this tonight, Lucy will frown when I say this, but I can't wait to get work on the second edition now. I mean, I want to get back into it. But I mean, I and certainly sort of the various ideas that we've kind of talked over today are really very exciting, and it'll be interesting to see you know, how the encyclopedia is received. But
perhaps you invite us in a year's time,
hey, that's a good
one, and ask us what the usage has been on this.
Yeah. Invite us anytime, because we've always got lots to say, whether you want to listen. I mean, I was saying earlier, we're working on a project at the moment about the concept of the library field at a macro level, you know, which is it's a different kind of wrapper. It's what you might call a strategic wrapper, to bring libraries either within a country or particularly across countries together to work on partnership projects for common benefit. And it sounds very easy to do it, but it's actually really quite difficult. And what we've been trying to do is to, on the one hand, identify exemplars, but on the other, to look at the kind of challenges that have to be overcome. And obviously, the final bit of our work is to recommend ways of doing it, and we've got quite excited about that, including using the benchmarking techniques that we put forward in one of our books recently. That's about to put the book up on screen. That's it. That's that one. Yeah.
There we go.
That's the one.
Yeah, it's there.
Yeah. And actually, one of the big things that's come out of that work that David's just referred to is, how do librarians or libraries, information scientists, how do they actually describe what they do? Because in order to advocate for your position, for instance, in order to become involved as a partner with other organizations who are bidding for funding to carry out public benefit projects, how do you actually encapsulate the special ingredient that you can bring to public benefit and societal good? And that's not something that librarians are typically, I mean, librarians do tend to hide their light under a bushel, as we would say in the UK. It's actually a biblical reference, I think, isn't it? But librarians aren't necessarily always so good at telling people what to do. You know, being bossy and saying, this is why you need us. This is what we can bring to these big consortia. And that's something that's come out in that recent IFLA piece of work, I think, David, isn't it?
Yeah, very much so. Yeah.
Apart from the titanic work that the encyclopedia involved, I want to highlight its importance in building community around all these topics, around the projects as a whole. We laid out a human social network that can be a very, very powerful force for even shaping the future of our field, if
I agree,
used appropriately. And also another very positive thing about it was that some young authors, researchers, and librarians could participate on it. I was very happy that one of my former PhD students wrote an entry and collaborated with me in another one. So I think that's a very good thing for myself as a professor, as a lecturer in the field, that I was able to incorporate a newer generation than myself.
Yeah. We had a number of people in that situation, and I must tell you this story. I know two of the people quite well. They are students, and I don't want people to be put off thinking it's students who've written the work. They might have been the author of the entry, but they were very much supported and helped as the kind of apprentice, to use that word, which is let's face it, how a lot of good work happens. You know, you sit next to the expert, the person, and you learn your trade by doing it, but doing it under supervision. And Elsevier wrote to them afterwards, and Elsevier said to both of them, "Dear Professor X," which they thought was hilarious on the one hand, but it gave them such confidence that those two people are going to take it further. They're going to say, well, you know, I've done it. I've been published. I've done this entry. It was very hard work, but I've done it. I want to do more. And I think that's a really good way of pushing, supporting the profession to move forward.
Absolutely.
You know?
Oh, yeah.
That's right. And I also mentioned that I convinced some of my former professors to write for it when I studied the bachelor in librarianship. And even my mother authored an entry.
Excellent.
Wow.
Love it.
That's fantastic.
I think one thing one thing that we haven't talked about, because we kind of rather have forgotten about it, and it's that in the early days we had what was called an advisory board, and I think we perhaps neglected the fact that was actually in the first 6-12 months of the project was actually very, very useful. It's your point about former professors, Juan, and that's that at the time we thought, well, while not everybody who's going to write an entry is yet an expert, they will be. But what we did have was a group of people, again from around the world, who were experts. They had been presidents of library associations. They had been senior professors of library and information schools.
Journal
editors, senior librarians, and they were really very helpful as what I call critical friends. So, you know, we'd say, we're thinking of doing this. Well, have you thought about the other? And again, we had several different countries represented. And I don't know whether you you were very heavily involved in that, Lucy. Any thoughts on the advisory board, as we called it?
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting to see who'd engaged with that process. And I think, though, what was really good, I mean, they were given a brief, mind you, but they had their main job was to see the thing published.
Yes.
And they could comment on the content, but of course it was their job, really, wasn't it, to guide it and steer it. And we had some big hitters in that group, actually.
We did, yeah. We had some big hitters because we were very keen to ensure that we did have a spread of expertise, at least at that stage. And I think that was really very useful. Yeah.
That's the one.
That's the one, yeah.
There's a list.
That's it.
Yeah. Yeah. And one of yours is, I know your colleague is there, Juan, a colleague of yours, someone you work with publishing Sage.
Yes, Stephen Parker.
Yeah.
And Kim Holberg was from Finland, is that right?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So we had some real. I mean,
Marshall Breeding.
Yeah, Marshall Breeding. Yeah. Again, significant person in the field. Biddy Fisher, very a leading light in UK and into Western international librarianship, and one-time president of what was then the Library Association. in the UK Library Association, but also heavily involved in IFLA as well. So I think we were much enriched by that group. And certainly if I were to be asked to advise, well, we have been asked to advise others on how do we do it. I would say one of the things you should have is make sure you've got a good advisory board.
That's right. It also gave us a sort of approval, right, from
Yes,
respected colleagues.
yeah, it did.
We must go back to them, and of course, and let them, give them the link for the encyclopedia. Perhaps I'll buy it.
I mean, it's interesting that a number of them, which I thought really pleased me, was that in some of my entries, but also when I was editing other entries, they were cited in the entries. So there was a kind of virtuous circle somehow, that having been involved at the start, we were citing their work and hopefully building on it as we develop the encyclopedia.
And we hope that all the authors are really pleased as well, seeing their work published, because there's nothing more thrilling than seeing something being published. And as you said, David, it makes all the hard work
absolutely
worthwhile, because it is really hard. I mean, I don't know about you. I mean, David, you write a lot more. You're a prolific writer and always publishing things. And you as well, Juan. But it is really hard work. It's not something that comes very easily to everybody. I don't know about you, Sal, but I mean, my entry, I mean, I love doing it, but it's not something I can't write that quickly. It's a bit like some people are fast readers and some people are really slow readers. And I think that sometimes applies to the writing process as well.
Yeah, sometimes it's something complicated for the professionals, because probably they don't want to write and it's very complicated for them. Probably for some people, it's much better manage a library and not to work in the investigation and try to write an article or something like that. And I know I'm totally agree with you. I think that it depends on everyone, but it's sometimes difficult for the people that it's an expert and try to share the knowledge,
Yeah. And it's scholarly writing. I mean, scholarly academic writing is not like other forms of writing. It just takes a lot longer, and everything has to be referenced, doesn't it? Everything, apart from common sense statements, everything has to have a source. And some people don't have the patience necessarily to reference everything that they write, but it's so important for academic writing, because although publishing models have changed enormously, artificial intelligence, AI, is going to change everything, but actually writing things, scholarly writing for publication, hasn't actually changed, has it, for a long time?
That brings me to something that I think, again, I hope that the encyclopedia will help with, and that's, for want of a better phrase, the discipline of library and information science. That if you go back, and I did it in terms of for the encyclopedia, historical entries, and if you go back 100 years, it was very much the early days of librarianship as a profession, let alone a discipline. And I think it's been, since 1945, there was a very strong move, certainly in the West, to professionalize librarianship, so that people, for example, it would become a graduate profession. You would do a degree, you would do a PhD, you would have departments of library and information studies. And I'd like to think that the encyclopedia is just one part of the continued development of library and information science as a discipline. And when you look at the encyclopedia, it's a discipline that now has a very significant corpus of not just literature, but research and movements and frameworks and sub-disciplines and new disciplines as it's changing. So Sal, you mentioned artificial intelligence. That's a whole new discipline within librarianship, let alone a discipline in its own right, if you see what I mean.
And that's a good point, David, because that has to be codified, doesn't it? Those emerging disciplines, sub-disciplines, they're codified in the literature. And perhaps, an encyclopedia like this can aid in that respect. Yeah, it's interesting to track the evolution of a discipline, isn't it? Yeah, and in the early days there were lots of interesting discussions we had about what should be included in the discipline. Do you remember?
Indeed.
You have to define the discipline somewhat. It's not easy.
It was very interesting. Sorry, you go first.
Yeah, sorry. It's very interesting because with your work, you can identify the transversal disciplines that is working with the librarianship, and it's very interesting too, because you can identify the different knowledge and different categories that are interacting with the profession. It's very interesting. Definitely.
Yeah,
absolutely. I agree with all that. I mean, I was very interested, and it was quite reassuring for me. I don't know whether you found this, you two, as contributors as well as section editor in your case, Juan. But because of something, I wrote some of my entries quite early on, and they were published. And a number of as soon as it had gone through the system, it appeared on Science Direct. So when I was doing literature searching for the later entries, I found myself bumping into I thought, oh, that looks interesting. And then I suddenly realized it was an entry from the encyclopedia. So I thought I was actually reassured by that there was a kind of another virtuous circle, that it was doing what it was meant to do. In other words, it was giving me material that I needed to produce another entry. So I was reassured by that. If none of the entries not just my entries, by the way, if none of the entries that had already been published when I was doing the later work had come up, there'd have been a problem, it seems to me. But there was a lot of cross-reference, as it were. And I thought, well, that's good. So it should be.
Yeah. And Juan, you mentioned Scopus earlier. Now, Scopus obviously is not Science Direct, but it's an Elsevier product. So could you just describe what you think is the value of Scopus to academics in the librarianship field?
Well, Scopus is very useful and one of the most used systems to find literature when you're starting a research. This is one of the uses of Scopus. Anyone wanting to start a new research project should look for the literature there, because all the best journals are also there, and also some books and some book chapters. This is what we call an index, right? Where we can find the index journals and also all the books and chapters. But it's also a bibliometric tool that we can use to identify the leading authors or the leading institutions regarding a given topic that we search for, and also to look for the citations. And, many people... Sorry,
carry on, Paul.
Okay. So, some people don't like indexes a lot because they have a selection process and very strict. But then, in my experience, I got many opportunities by having publications in sources indexed in Scopus, because other researchers around the world will identify you by your publications, and that can bring you collaboration opportunities.
Sure.
So that's why it's very attractive if entries are indexed in Scopus, because they will have more visibility, and also their authors will have it. and that may call for even more citations, and we can keep track actually of the citations of the encyclopedia there.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And I think you said that all authors are in Scopus now. So Sal, you'll be your entry will be in there, and funnily enough, with those very, very final entries that we just couldn't. It was very difficult, wasn't it, for 2 or 3 of these entries where we couldn't find authors. And ironically enough, I remember using Scopus to see if we could find authors for a couple of them. So that's a bit of an irony, but it is tremendously powerful resource. And
I'm sorry, David. Please go on, please.
Okay, I was just going to say. I mean, we've done a lot of talking about the encyclopedia, but you two have both contributed as contributors and as section editor. What's your advice to us about what do you think we should do next? I mean, should we push for an early second edition of the encyclopedia? I mean, we could just forget about it and say that was good, great, love it, and then forget about it. I don't want to do that, especially in the light of tonight and being excited by our discussion. I mean, how do we keep the momentum up, if at all?
I wouldn't say work on it on the second edition right away.
No.
Just let me rest a bit. But don't leave it without touching it for many years, right? But I think that the big push right now should be on promoting it. And if we could get in other places, such as this podcast or conferences where we talk about the work and promoting it, and that would be a very good thing. So more people are aware of the work, and we get more citations, and probably we will get contributors for the second edition.
That's a good point.
This way.
Good point. Yeah.
And I will think that mainly promoting it, and also other projects that can be done more quickly, that namely other books. We should build upon the sort of database that we have with the encyclopedia to also produce books that reference back to the encyclopedia.
I agree with that. Yeah.
I also think we need to work on keeping the community of authors, trying to develop we've got this huge body of authors, and I think we don't want it to seem like a transaction so much where, you provided a contribution. Thank you very much. Goodbye. How do we keep the community of authors together? I think that's going to be something to think about.
That would be very powerful. And also because we were not organized from an association or a union or something else. We organized ourselves almost informally as colleagues around a large piece of work.
And that was the benefit that we could provide, we could give to Elsevier, is that we had the contacts. We were the people who could do it. And I like to think that we have delivered on that. But it's a question of how do we keep this community of authors alive? Because if we leave it too long, it will be recessive, won't it? It'll recede into the back of people's minds. That's kind of a difficult question, actually, how you do that, how you keep the links.
I think that's something that you and I talk further, Lucy, but I think it's Juan's point about we involve them in other projects. So perhaps a subgroup, we look at a particular section.
And also in the promotion, perhaps even Elsevier can help organizing workshops around some of subtopics or sections of the encyclopedia and having good conferences. I
agree with that. And talking of conferences, just to do a plug, Lucy and I and you, Juan, are speaking at the London Book Fair in March next year. And obviously, our slot, that's me and Lucy, our slot is very much, it's sort of going to be based a bit like this. It's going to be reflections on the encyclopedia and what does it, again, summarizing what I'm thinking about doing. What we're thinking about doing is looking at a lot of the articles, the entries rather, and looking at the futures section and seeing what those futures sections say. Some of them were written 12, 18 months ago. So are they still on track? Are those the bits that need some more work? Is that where some of the projects, the forward projects should be? But also reflecting to an audience that, given its nature, is obviously going to include a wide range of people involved, including, if not especially, publishers. And it's perhaps an anomaly that it's still called the London Book Fair,
And there might be a good idea over there. Why don't you think about a book with chapters, very brief chapters, where we invite all contributors of the encyclopedia to expand on their future section or of their entries.
Brilliant.
But looking forward to having, I don't know, chapters that are 2,000 or 3,000 words, short chapters, where they expand upon what they projected is the future.
I think that's a brilliant idea. It very much fits in with something that I've been very keen on for a number of years, and we've included it in 2 or 3 of our books over the years, and that's the Delphi technique, and this is a kind of variant of that, where we could say, you wrote this 2 years ago. What do you think of the future section now? And what do you think your future section will look like if you're writing in the next edition of the encyclopedia and the same entry in 3 to 5 years' time? I think we've got the next book. And obviously people listening in tonight and listening to this, watching this podcast, we're very happy to involve more people. I think it's great because one can get a very rich picture, it seems to me, from this kind of work. And certainly, I probably have a tendency to over-rely on Delphi techniques, but I'd rather be reliant on something like that, which is real people coming together, combining to say, we think the future is going to be this. And certainly, I remember many years ago, I did a Delphi exercise back in 1995, I think it was. And then I revisited it 10 years later, and then 20 years later. And it sounds boastful, but I was very pleasantly surprised at how many of the things that expert group had got right. They got some things totally wrong, but they got some of it right, whether it was the economics or the resource discovery or indeed the content creation. I think the bits that they got most wrong were not to do with what, but how quickly. It all happened a lot faster than they were predicting.
Yeah, well, this is a very good opportunity for all the people that is thinking and write something. I think that it's a good moment to rethink for the second edition that probably comes on. And open invitation to all the people that is thinking and write. Definitely.
Absolutely.
It's a good moment. Think and share your knowledge if you are an expert in any
how would people contact us, Juan, who are listening in tonight?
We were about to ask you about that.
Okay.
Do you want us to share your emails?
Yeah, share the email. Yeah, share the email.
Right.
That's fine.
I will copy them and share them.
It's already on the website anyway, the David Baker Consulting website. Very happy for people to contact me. And then what we typically do is obviously we talk with them, correspond, we talk. We might have a Teams, a Zoom, or whatever, and then we explore ideas, and then we like people to write something for us in terms of a proposal. If it's a book, we use the official Elsevier proposal form, which we help people. We work with people to formulate their ideas, and obviously we can't guarantee publication, not if it's a book. We can more or less guarantee publication if it's a chapter in one of our books, but we are pretty good at getting a book proposal into a form that's acceptable to the publisher. While most of our publishing is done with Elsevier, we have been working with another publisher recently, but that's not so much on a library and information sciences platform. It's on, as Lucy said, it's on supporting mature students in higher education. But I think through you, Juan, we've got somebody from your university writing for us on that. In fact, I was editing their chapter earlier today.
Fortunately, we could have many colleagues from our own university writing for the Encyclopedia, and also from other universities in Mexico.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Absolutely good. Yeah,
it's been really nice to come on and talk about the encyclopedia and librarianship in general with you both. I must say it's been really nice for us to have the opportunity to do them and reflect.
Yeah,
We'll do this again.
We shall. And the great thing, man, is that it wasn't at 2:00 in the morning our times.
That's right. I didn't put you in the graveyard shift.
Which is why I sent an email back and said, you do really mean 1700 GMT, don't you?
Oh, dear.
Not
The good thing is this is the usual time of the podcast.
Okay.
Yeah,
What time is it with you then at the moment?
Now it's 12:32 in Mexico, and in Spain, Saul.
Here at 7:30. Yeah.
Saul is in Spain.
Oh yeah, you're an hour ahead. Yeah,
Yeah, right. Definitely.
Because I think we'd be in sync if it were British summertime. Yeah.
Well, guys, I think that we can go for the last question. What do you think, Juan? The usual end question of the podcast.
All right. The most difficult question in InfoTecarios Podcast is the last question.
Yeah, right.
Where we ask our guests to tell us about their hobbies. What do you do when you are not editing books or encyclopedias?
Do you want to go first, Lucy?
Well, okay. Well, I'm like David. I'm a musician, so I'm in a panto. Do you know a pantomime for Christmas?
Pantomime. It's
a pantomime, a show. I'm in a show, and I'm playing the fairy godmother. So I have to turn Cinderella's pumpkin into a coach. And I like to play the piano to accompany also all the songs. And that's pretty much what I'm doing with my spare time at the moment. So it's a bit daft, I know, but I'm afraid that's just what happens when you live in a small place. And
yeah,
that's incredible. I would have never guessed.
Interesting, definitely.
I'm probably a bit more predictable. I mean, I perform, I play music, and I do it professionally, but it's a hobby in the sense that I love doing it, and I like to say it uses the other side of my brain, the creative side of my brain. And the other thing is, it might seem strange, but I also, all my writing's for pleasure. I love writing, but I also write fiction. I write novels. So I've published 4 novels. 3 of them are detective novels, murder mysteries, and one of them is a historical novel set in the 5th century. But one of the 3 detective stories is set in the 19th century. So it's both historical and it's a murder mystery. And I love doing the research because, especially for the historical novels, you've got to be so very careful that you don't say something that's impossible. You know that, and there were some really minor things that I'd like to think I'd got a good head for it, but I got my grandson, who's at university now, I got him to do some research for me on, for example, the Victorian book is set in 1879. So I had to get him to research on whether certain things had been invented in 1879, for example. And the police, what ranks did they have, and was there a police force, and all this kind of, and it was fascinating. I absolutely loved it, and I learned so much from because I'm waiting for the day when somebody writes to me and says, I loved your book, but do you realize that the something or other wasn't invented until 1882, and your book was published in 1817, was written rather in 1879. So I worry about that more than I worry about what people think of the encyclopedia.
Well, I can vouch for the quality of the books because I've read them all.
Yeah, not that any of the characters are based on real people.
Very nice. So great to have you here. Thank you for coming in.
Really enjoyed it.
Thank you.
For the audience, for their attention, as usual. Remember that if you missed it, you will have the recording in all the social media and podcasting platforms. Give us a like, a subscribe to the InfoTecarios social media. Saul?
Definitely. Please follow the different accounts. You have Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, all the platforms, and follow the account in Facebook and on the other social networks. It was a pleasure to have an amazing guest this night. Thank you, David. Thank you, Lucy. It was great. Definitely. We enjoy a lot. Definitely. It was great. Probably the last comments. Yeah.
And let me try to translate Toño's phrase for saying goodbye to each episode. If you liked the episode, please recommend it to a friend. If you didn't like it, recommend it to an enemy. Perhaps something good will come out of it.
Love it.
Yeah, definitely. So, thank you guys. Thank you for your time.
Anyway.
Our pleasure.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you, and see you soon
Take
in the
care.
next episode.
Yeah, next time.
Lovely. Anytime.
Okay.
Bye.